Welcome everybody to Family Futures webinar. The person you can hear talking is me, I'm Sue. I'm also a Director of Family Futures and I'll be guiding us through the webinar this evening. So we're here this evening to share Liam's story, which is a beautiful and powerful animation about the life of Liam, as told by his mum Judith, his dad David, and his twin brother Tom. And then we'll go on to discuss the issues that it raises and that help is out there no matter how desperate you feel. For those participants who don't know Family Futures, we're an adoption agency and adoption support agency specialising in therapy with children and young people who've experienced early life trauma. We work with young people and their families who are adoptive families, foster families or kinship families. And we'd like to start by saying to Liam's family and friends that it's hard to find the words to say how sorry we are for your loss. But we are extremely grateful that you're telling Liam's story so that others can be helped. As many of you are aware, this webinar is taking place on World Suicide Prevention Day, as suicide is often under-recognised and hard to talk about, but it's especially significant now as we experience the way in which the worldwide pandemic is affecting people's mental health. So we'll begin with marking Suicide Prevention Day with a lit candle, which is happening all over the world today to remember loved ones who have died. We will then watch the animation, and questions relating to the video and to the issues it raises will be answered by the panel at the end. So first, to remember Liam and to show support to all of those who've been affected by suicide, we will show Liam's mum having lit a candle with his photo as a reminder of the lovely young man who's bringing our thinking together today. Before we start the animation, we are aware that some participants today are personally affected by Liam's story, and others will be thinking of people that they've lost. So it's inevitable that a range of feelings will come up, possibly love, grief, anger, guilt, fear, and many more. So please take good care of yourselves and know that you are not alone. We are all sharing our hearts today. As much as possible, please use the support of those around you. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll also be discussing supports that are available to anyone affected by suicide. And we have a guest from Papyrus, which is an organisation which supports people affected by suicide. So we'll now watch the animation of Liam's life, narrated by his family in honour of him.
The first time we met Liam, he woke from sleeping at his third set of foster carers, came to my open arms, and we hugged. He had a little tear in his eye. The following week, we took him and his twin brother to the park. He held our hands and shouted, "Run, Mummy! Run, Daddy!"
My wife and I were quickly accepted to adopt Liam and his twin brother, aged 4 3/4. They had suffered from neglect and abuse, having been born to a drug-addicted mother, herself the product of a dysfunctional family.
Liam was crying out to be loved. After visiting our home just once, he brought over his favourite toy, a talking octopus, given to him by his current foster carers, and left it on his new bed. When he first moved in, he would come into our bedroom every morning and wake me for a cuddle. He brought us such fun, joy and love, and I genuinely believe we did the same for him and his brother. Liam loved school, he had loads of friends, he joined Beavers, then Cubs and Scouting, a youth choir and youth theatre. He loved these activities and came across as a happy and very loving child.
The approach to and onset of puberty can be a difficult time for anyone. For Liam, it caused him to question his identity, his past and his sexuality. We continued to tell him we loved him, no matter what. Questions were undoubtedly in his head about adoption, and he had memories of his early life. By 15, Liam's mood problems were clearer. He was becoming more withdrawn and starting to self-harm, later disclosing ideas of suicide. At 16, he traced some of his birth family on social media. When previously referred to the Children and Adolescent Mental Health Service, his early background was presumed to be behind all his problems. We now know this wasn't so.
Around that time, we found Family Futures in London. We were impressed by their compassion, support and understanding. Local therapy was not working for either of our sons. But only after a long struggle were we eventually able to get funding for therapy there.
It was extremely helpful to us as a family, but when further funding required authorisation, local services again resisted, despite not being able to provide it themselves. It was finally supported, and it was during this therapy that Liam further opened up about being groomed by a predatory paedophile in the local area.
Liam told me that his therapist at Family Futures was the first person he could really talk to about his past abuse. We know he tried to cope with this alone for far too long. At 18, he decided to live nearby with his partner. He had met his partner at work, a large care home that Liam had quit his A-levels to work at in order to gain an apprenticeship in health and social care.
Liam was promoted to assistant team leader. Unfortunately, this reward for being good at his job also brought the pressure of being in charge of many older women who didn't take easily to this. Liam felt bullied and undermined. Without perceived appropriate support, he eventually handed his notice in for a job he loved.
In the wake of all this, Liam went to see his GP. During the appointment, he disclosed that he was having suicidal thoughts, and it was apparent that he had already badly cut himself. Unfortunately, despite this, the doctor didn't understand how distressed Liam was on that day, and no one was contacted to help to keep him safe. Liam walked home alone, wrote notes to his partner, twin brother, and ourselves, and then took his own life. Liam lived for 5 days on intensive care before it was certain he would not recover. He was able to donate 6 of his precious organs to 5 individuals. He was 19 and a half years old.
The things that I've been through would leave man in pieces. Home don't feel at home, I guess that's where the street is. Loads of bros on my phone, that's not where I need them. When I think about the dirt, thankful for my freedom. You can wash your hands, but that dirt ain't clean. Got the call from my mum, I had a bad feeling. She said, Tom, something's wrong. I can hear mad breathing. Straight to the hospital, taxi man speeding. Jumped out the whip, still got that bad feeling. So I sprint to the room that everyone should be in. We ain't talked for 2 weeks, last time was beefing. That's my twin bro, how do I handle this feeling? When I got the news, it's like a knife went deep in. Stayed there a week, that's a week, no sleeping. But my mum strong, kept us all eating. I was confused by how the doctor was speaking. Now I couldn't handle that. Sprinted to the ceiling, at the top of the stairs there was a door with a key in. Went through the door, and I'm on the roof now, weighing up my options, thinking what should I do now. We've been through the hard part, why you gotta choose now? Everything I go through, I think of you now, huh?
Liam took his own life at a time when he felt depressed. It was very hard to listen to the coroner tell us what we already knew. We want to help you, or someone you know and love, avoid being the young person who dies, or one of those left behind to cope with the consequences of such a tragedy. We cannot bring our gorgeous son back, but if just one person gets key help to live on, it would mean the world to us.
It is hard not to let every day become overshadowed by Liam's death. Some days are worse than others, but we try and keep each other going. It is especially hard for his twin brother, who now has a daughter of his own. Liam was full of love and joy. The residents at work adored him. His family and friends were so lucky to know him, and he lives on in us.
Liam's start in life was extremely tough. The rest of his childhood brought lots of love and support, but other bad things happened too. His suicide notes told us how much he loved us, and never to think his decision had anything remotely to do with us, but rather how he felt in himself at the time.
Liam did have more to cope with than most can ever imagine. He also had a devoted family, partner and friends, great talent for his work, and a capacity for joy that at times lit up whatever room he was in. It seems obvious that his best days were ahead of him. Yet on that day, he thought he couldn't cope anymore, didn't think he could be helped, and ended his own life. It wasn't like that the day before, and probably would not have been the day after, but neither he nor us had the chance to find out. Anyone can experience thoughts of suicide, no matter who they are. Telling others or being told of the feelings can be very difficult, but that communication is a very important part of staying alive and safe until things improve, which they will. If you are a young person having suicidal thoughts or thinking of ending your life, I know what we would have wanted to say to Liam. I know it can be hard to trust others, but talk to someone. Tell someone how you really feel. Pick up the phone. Tomorrow will be different. I know that is not easy to do, but I know that your life is worth fighting for. If someone tells you they are having suicidal ideas, please act to keep them safe. Then look for support either from local services or through organisations such as these.
Welcome back, everyone. And I think what I'd like us just to do is to reconnect with ourselves, because that can bring up some important feelings. So can I just invite you to make connection with yourself? Put your hands maybe on your thighs if you're sitting, or on your shoulders, maybe across your chest. Just be able to support yourself. Maybe move your shoulders. Take some deep breaths, and I would just recommend looking around the room that you're in. Just connect with what's around you. Notice any windows, any doors, maybe look behind you, so that you can just reorientate back into the space that you're in. And just take a little breather. Okay. what I'd like to do is I'd like to introduce you to the panelists. I'm sorry that you can't see everyone, but they are all very valuable people here with a lot to contribute. So we will work with just sound, that's fine. And I'd like to begin with Jay. Could you introduce yourself?
My name is Jay Vaughan. I am Registered Manager and CEO of Family Futures. I'm a therapist who's been working with children from the care system for 30 years. And I'm very proud to have had a very, very small part to play in this webinar happening today and the wonderful video that's been created by Tim. And to be able to do something that I know Judith and David really wanted, to make a difference and to support others in feeling that they can get help, they can get support if they're struggling.
Thank you very much. And as you've mentioned, Tim, perhaps we could have Tim next.
Hi there, my name's Tim. I'm a filmmaker and animator. I've worked a lot with Family Futures over the years, and I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to direct and animate this film for Family Futures and for Judith and David and Liam, of course.
Lovely, thank you. Perhaps we could go to you, Alan.
I'm Alan Burnell. I'm co-founder of Family Futures along with Jay, and I had the privilege to meet Liam and his brother and his family. We were thinking nearly 6 years ago now, when we did our first assessment at their home.
Thank you, Alan. That's wonderful. Judith, are you with us now?
Okay, I'm Judith, and I was Liam's mum.
Thank you very much indeed. Kathy, could I ask you next?
Hi, thanks, Sue. Hi, everyone. My name's Kathy. I'm one of the therapists on the team at Family Futures, and I was part of the team supporting the family, and I worked specifically as the parent support person working with Judith and David.
Thank you. And Jaspreet, could we hear from you?
Hi, I'm Jaspreet. I'm a clinical psychologist in the therapy team, and part of the team supporting the family, and I was Liam's therapist.
Lovely, thank you. I think magically we can put our faces on the screen now so people can actually see. Wow, gosh, not a minute too late. Thank you very much, Rosemary. Well done for maybe the magic one. And so, George.
Hi, everyone. I'm a systemic psychotherapist at Family Futures, and I also worked with the family over a number of years, particularly quite a lot with Tom.
But I'll just let you know that Sophie Cartwright is a volunteer from the Hopeline UK line, which is part of Papyrus, who specialise in supporting families and young people affected by suicide. So we're very pleased to have you joining us, Sophie. Sorry we can't quite see you yet, but we hope to have you with us very shortly. Okay, so what I'd like to ask first, we have had some questions in. Thank you very much. I will attend to those and also keep questions coming in as they appear to you. But first of all, it would be great to find out how the animation came about, because that's been the key anchoring point for us all today in thinking about your experience as a family. So Judith, could you start us off? Could you tell us a bit about the animation?
Yes, certainly I can, yes. And it's lovely to speak to everybody. I'm guessing a lot of people that are watching actually know me, so thank you for being here and supporting us. It came about as we instinctively thought of collecting monies for Family Futures at Liam's funeral and asking for donations to Family Futures because you'd helped us so much as a family. Family Futures then created a Liam's fund, and ongoing discussions really took place of how best to spend the money to honour Liam and to help promote suicide prevention. Both Dave and I independently wrote down how we felt about everything that had happened as part of a coping mechanism for ourselves. And we shared that with Family Futures. Tom, as a way of coping, writes these powerful raps because he finds it hard to talk to other people and discuss things with therapists and family members and friends. So he writes the powerful raps. We shared these, and then Family Futures approached Tim, who's here, to actually design the animation based on the words that David and myself and Tom had used. And we feel it's very sad, but very real and very beautiful that the animation was created. And we're very grateful to Tim and the composer that he used for doing that.
Thank you. And Jaspreet, as Liam's therapist, I think you're going to get involved with it as well?
Yeah, so mainly the team kind of had a background role really in terms of supporting Judith and David in thinking about how they'd like to use that money and what they'd like to create. And then we really just kind of supported and facilitated the process once Judith and David kind of had written their letters and come up with those ideas.
Great, thank you. So Tim, you were given these writings and raps and things. So tell us about your role in it. What was your process?
So I was given those two pretty powerful bits of writing from Judith and David without really having any idea of Liam's background or anything. So kind of coming to it fresh, like maybe some of the audience members might be, and took that and just cut it down as best as I could to try and make it into something that could fit into a film script, and started drawing and got together some ideas, and we did a lot of just bouncing stuff backwards and forwards between people in Family Futures and Judith and David and Tom as well, and just tried to get something that we were all happy with, and I think it turned out quite well.
It really has. We've had comments from people saying it's very beautiful and moving, that they've been very impacted, so thank you. It's I think it's an animation that will touch many people over time, so thank you. So my next question for the panel is, what advice would you give to professionals? Because one of the issues that has arisen in the animation is that Liam sought help on the day, but that for him that help wasn't responsive enough. And I think one of the questions is, what advice can you give to professionals who know that a young adult, so 18 or over, is feeling suicidal, as they try to weigh up issues of confidentiality against the needs of keeping the young person safe? Because I think that's often an issue for professionals. And I wonder, Judith, could you maybe start with your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I don't know whether anybody heard me this morning on Radio 5 Live, but I strongly feel that when a young person loses perspective, which I believe Liam did that day, and is really struggling, they need to be helped by those who love them to stay safe until that perspective changes, which I believe it will. You would want your loved ones to be there if you had a physical life-threatening problem, and not to be left alone. I suppose for me, perhaps for a professional to say to the young person, I need to ensure we keep you safe whilst you're having these suicidal thoughts and you're obviously feeling incredibly distressed, and to act in your best interests, I need to ring your loved ones. And I think Liam would have actually been relieved that day if somebody had have dressed his wounds and rung David or myself or his partner. I do believe that, and I don't want to apportion blame, but I do think when somebody is obviously so distressed and has made an appointment because they say they're feeling suicidal, that, you know, that their safety has got to be safeguarded to live on.
Okay, thank you.
I think just to add to that as well, I think so many young people find it really hard to be able to tell parents or loved ones, and then it's really hard for the family members to be able to support if they're not aware of what's going on. And I think it's really hard, that kind of 18 plus age, when you know, they've reached adulthood, and so kind of confidentiality has a different perspective at that point. But you know, just knowing that safeguarding always takes precedence over confidentiality, and maybe being able to talk with the young person about that in advance, to think about, you know, so that you're not just planning that when the young person's really distressed, so you can have a think in advance of who they might feel able to be to reach out to and to be told in that moment. And especially so for somebody like Liam, who had you know, some difficulties in his past, so was a vulnerable young person, it feels even more important.
I think what you're saying is really important, Justpreet, because I think as a parent one realises that actually 18, you're not grown up, you've still got a lot of growing up to do. And I think we know for adopted young people or for children from the care system, often they are not as developmentally matured as they are for their chronological years. So it's so important to still have parents involved. And I think we need to be changing the thinking about actually what support is put in place. We know that lots of young people in universities, there have been lots of young people killing themselves, and the parents not being told, even though the university that they may be struggling. So I would like to see thinking changing. As you said, I think for children and young people to be asked about this in advance, but I still think that the safeguarding issue should outweigh the decision to be made. It's about putting that safety in place and letting parents know.
There's a clear message really to give to professionals that safety is the primary issue, and that securing that support is vital. Okay, so I mean, obviously Liam's story is very particular, very specific, but many children and young people who have lived in care or been adopted have had very traumatic histories, and that often places them at higher risk for mental health problems. And I'm wondering how we can understand that better in terms of suicidality in young people. Alan, we can't see you on the screen. Are you
No, I don't know why that is.
Okay. Are you able just to say something about that? Because you obviously, you met the family 6 years ago, 5 years ago.
Yes. Well, I think it's a matter of looking at the risk factors. And I think when I researched this, there are two key risk factors for young people causing them to contemplate taking their own lives. And one is past traumas and current life stresses. And if you put those two factors together, then that's when people are at risk of taking their own lives or self-harming and taking their own lives. And I think for me, what it says is that you don't have to be a psychiatrist or a rocket scientist to put these two factors together. If you're a friend, a relative, a family member, a teacher, a youth worker, if you know that a young person has had been in care, been fostered, been adopted, they probably had a very traumatic early life experience. And if they're currently stressed, they are going to be vulnerable. And I just wanted to say one other thing, which is that given those two factors are very clear, and it means that all children in the care system are vulnerable, that resources, financial resources for therapy and for counselling for those young people in care should be made available, because potentially a lot of children, I won't say all children in the care system or all children who are fostered or adopted, but a large percentage of them will be at risk of self-harming and potentially of taking their own lives, particularly in adolescence. So I think when we talk about suicide, prevention, we do need to look at the very vulnerable children that are coming through the care system, are fostered and are adopted.
And take preventative action.
Yeah, whether you're whoever you are.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Jaspreet, would you want to comment on that as having worked with Liam?
Yeah, I mean, I think for Liam, in his case, he was really aware that he'd had really difficult experiences in his very early life and then in adolescence also, and he really wanted things to be different, and he wanted therapy to help him to overcome those difficulties. And he did work hard, and he reached a point where he was able to have good relationships with Judith and David, and be able to open up more so than he had before. And he had reached a point where something that was very hard for Liam his whole life, to ask for help, he was actually at a point where he was more able to do that. And I think that was huge progress, given that from his past experiences, he really struggled to trust that people might be able to help him, especially his loved ones. And so I think it says a lot that he was able to go to the GP that day to ask for help. But I think also being that help, being highly responsive in those moments is really vital if the young person does reach out, because I think that could have really made a difference for Liam that day.
Yeah. I was thinking, for some young people, they don't reach out. And I suppose the challenge for parents and professionals is to be thinking about picking up on those clues, those indicators, those strange words or comments that aren't usual for them to make, and really trusting your instincts that something isn't right and that you're worried, because sometimes people can't say explicitly. It's very sad that Liam did and it wasn't heard properly. But another group of young people who aren't able always to voice what they're thinking, but they will give clues. So I want to put in a plea as well for trusting one's instincts and picking up on those clues, those words that slip in sometimes that mean something significant.
Just wanting to feedback here a comment from a participant who has a connection with Judith. But the important point that you're making here is that the issue here is that GPs do not have the time and are often under severe pressure to get people in and out in 6 minutes. And I think that's the reality, that we're often in a position where the services available aren't as available as they would want to be, because the time limits are so pressured. And so sorry, Judith, yes.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, working in primary care myself. And I think that needs to change. It needs to change dramatically. And I think I said this morning, I certainly no wish to apportion any blame, but it does need to change. If somebody has got chest pain or, a physical problem, all the emergency things are done, and colleagues will come in, will step in to help their colleagues so that actions can take place to support the person who has the life-threatening condition. And I think that anything to do with mental health and somebody that is at such high risk, it needs to change, and mental health needs to be given much greater priority in primary care than we're currently able to do in the system that everybody works under. Even people that have voiced suicide concerns in the past, to me, should have regular checks like somebody would for a chronic disease, unless they wish to opt out of that. There's so much that could be done. Yeah, thank you.
One of the key things that is also being flagged by the same participant is that one of the key things that needs to be done is good communication. The participant is signalling his own very sad experience of losing a child to suicide. And he's glad that the psychotherapist who was working with his child was keeping information from the GP, so there wasn't cohesive support. So I think the clear indication from that is that not only do we need services to be able to listen, but we need them to communicate, to really communicate with each other, and to communicate with the people who are there to support the child or the young person. There are some other very important issues being raised, and I'm going to get to them as we go through. I'd quite like to ask the next question, because this is also relevant to some of the points being made here. That self-harm and suicidal feelings are often a source of great shame to young people, and often in particular young men can find it hard to say how they feel. And how can others help young people to talk about how they feel, especially when the loved ones who surround that young person are often struggling themselves, not only with the impact of what's happening for the child or young person, but also trying to negotiate the services and navigate the services that are around. So I don't know, Kathy, could you maybe start?
Yeah, I think that's a really key point that someone's raised. It's an enormous burden to hold when your child is feeling so unsafe. So I think getting the support you need for yourself, if you can, however you can, to help you is really key. As you say, lots of young people, particularly boys, find it really hard to talk about feelings and to talk about enormous feelings of self-hatred or fear or panic leading to suicidal feelings. And I think one of the things we would say is that you keep it on the agenda all the time, even when or if they stop talking or stop asking for help, that you hold it in mind, and we have to be creative about where we meet them. And that might mean that you have to be ready to have a conversation at midnight, or a flyby conversation in the car, and you accept that, a really short conversation is as much as they can manage, but it's making those connections, keeping open to those connections, and encouraging, the brilliant example of Tom's writing, that's where Tom has gone. That's how he's communicating and expressing those huge feelings, that those creative outlets, if all you can do to make those available for young people and be responsive to those, I think it's keeping it on the agenda all the time and finding those ways to stay open to the communication, however it might come, and wherever and whenever it might come. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm
going to come in here, Sue. Whistle. Yeah, can you hear me? Is it okay, the sound? Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, I suppose just picking up on some of those points. I mean, one thing I thought it was maybe useful to also make a distinction between self-harm and suicide, because we know that the two are certainly connected, because I think that's in the question you asked, Sue, and there's certainly a greater likelihood of somebody taking their own life if they self-harm. But of course, the motivations behind self-harm are complex, and not everybody who self-harms will have an intent to die. So I think that's maybe one distinction to just draw in on this. And I suppose, in talking about, it centres, I suppose, young men, and obviously the suicide rates are, I think it's 2 or 3 times higher for men to take their own life than women. And it's been talked about for some time, I suppose, that this is a real problem out there. And it seems that some of those conversations are just starting to occur, say, in relation to masculinity. Is that connected with this in boys and young men not wanting to talk, not feeling that, it's okay to talk about how I feel as a young boy growing up? And I think that the complication can sometimes happen where professionals may also respond in a certain way, and perhaps more so to boys, in whether that's minimizing that risk in sick. And this is, I think there needs to be a lot more research here, but particularly this has been highlighted in self-harm, for example, where boys may present A&E with self-harm, but there isn't the same response as there is with girls. So I think there is complicating factors, and in how you do this, I suppose, as a professional, a key thing that I often go by is, I suppose, it's being with, a young person rather than sort of doing to. And I think in this area of suicidal thoughts and self-harm, there's been a proliferation of various questionnaires and so on, tools that sometimes professionals may have their checklists. But of course, for some young people, if you put that in front of them, they're only going to be less likely to come back or share, how they're feeling, because it's not really a human response. You're not present with the young person. And I think in a lot of our work, how to be there and create a safe space is the key thing. Just building that trust with the young person in order to
George,
feel that they can talk. Yes, you're going on.
I remember when we first met with Tom and Liam, you were in a youth club, and we spent our time playing table tennis or pool with them. It wasn't a formal sit down and tell us all about your feelings. It was a much more, interactive, relaxed, I think, way of approaching the issues.
Exactly, yeah. And I suppose we've got a few issues with that now, I guess, with the context of COVID. And this is another challenge, I guess, in how to create that space. It might be a bit more tricky to get down the youth club. And
we didn't quite get to hugging, did we?
But I guess the key point, and this fits with what was being said earlier, that when professionals are under pressure, very often they will just try and get to the core of things. And what you're saying is that in order to be able to feel safe enough to communicate, we have to really feel that someone's alongside us. And that does take time and effort. And I think when GPs are having a very short time to see people, maybe they're not the best people to do that, but then they would need to get in touch with the people who are. And I guess that the point that you're making is we need some scope within the system for people who can spend the time to really get alongside young people.
Exactly, and I think that's such a key point, Sue. It's the collaboration. I suppose it goes back to the communication. And so often you may have people say, no, well, you do this bit, the psychotherapist does this bit, or the GP does this bit. And how does a collaborative approach? Because I think we'll all hold, a different side, and obviously for the family and for the people around that young person themselves, of course, and how that young person's able to use their own words, to express how they're feeling.
And I just want to pick up, because in the Q&A there is a comment from a participant that many young people who are struggling with suicidal thoughts have a range of complex needs, and quite often that means there's a range of people involved in their lives. And quite often that doesn't mean that they're also involved with the parents of the child or young person. And unfortunately, I don't think that we have the magic answer to that, because resources vary from area to area so much, but what we do know is that there are national helplines and services, and maybe that's a kind of a good point for us to maybe think about inviting Sophie. You'll see, Sophie, that on some of the questions there are very profound questions about a volunteer from the Samaritans saying, look, what do I say to somebody when they are on the end of the phone in distress? I can't self-disclose, but I need to be able to support them. There's someone else saying what help is available for families and loved ones who are supporting young people who are struggling. And so can you help us, as you are from a service that specialises particularly in suicide? Could you share your knowledge with us?
Absolutely. Sorry about my technical issues before, so hello to everybody and thank you very much for having me. I mean, from the Samaritans question, I mean, that's something that I encounter every single day when I'm on Hopeline UK, speaking to people that are at immediate risk of potentially acting on those thoughts of suicide. And I think from Hopeline UK's perspective, we have an intervention policy, which means if anybody we're speaking to is at immediate risk of harm, we are able to intervene, and we do that by accessing that person's number and contacting the emergency services. We make the young person aware of this at the start of the call and making sure that they're happy to continue. So from a Samaritan's point of view, I completely appreciate like how incredibly tough that can be, and to be in that moment when you've got somebody on the end of the phone. And I understand that we'll have completely different policies, even though, you know, we work in a very similar line of work. And I think that's, you know, the skills that come with doing a job like this is to try and remain as calm as we possibly can. And I think taking the fact that that person has picked up the phone and called us, to me would suggest that that's a sign of hope. Despite how overwhelming and painful things might be going on in that person's life, the fact that they've been able to pick up that phone and dial that number would suggest, even if it's 1% of them that is still fighting, to try and empower that part of them as much as you possibly can. Because, you know, when you are on the other end of the phone, sometimes there is a limit to what you can do, and it's important that you're honest and open with that person and not making any false promises, and making sure, from, you know, your point as well, that you're having enough support with your colleagues. I know when I get off at the end of a really tough call, it's important that we debrief with each other to make sure that we feel like we've done the right thing, we're not carrying anything on our shoulders, and you're not taking it home. It's incredibly important in the line of work that you do. What was the second question, sorry?
So there was, what support is available for families and loved ones who are supporting young people who are struggling?
Okay, thank you for that. So I would say, especially a service just like ourselves, so our charity, as was mentioned before, is called Papyrus, and I work as a suicide prevention advisor on their Hopeline, which is Hopeline UK. And we support not only people experiencing thoughts of suicide, but also people that are concerned about that person as well. So that person could be a parent, it could be a sibling, it could be a friend, it could be a professional like a social worker or a police person. So I would encourage you to contact a service like ourselves to speak to a professional, you know, around suicide, to vent about how you're feeling, to discuss that with a professional, so we can give you advice and guidance on how to cope with dealing with someone who's experiencing thoughts of suicide, how, you know, really importantly, how to start that conversation with a young person, and why that's so important. Because we find a lot of times people who are concerned as this calling, when we're encouraging them to ask the question, they may say things like, oh, but I don't want to put the idea in their head. And we know that most evidence suggests that that won't happen. And by asking that question can actually really reduce the chances of that person acting on those thoughts. Because for a young person to come out and say, I'm having thoughts of suicide, is so, so difficult. But it's easy for that person to say yes or no. And so it's definitely something that we would, you know, encourage. And that's why, you know, we support people who are, you know, supporting others having these thoughts. And it's a place that people can be really honest. It's a safe place for someone supporting somebody else to have these conversations, because as much as our focus is that person experiencing those thoughts, for a family member, friend, whoever you are, supporting someone, that is one of the most painful things to go through. And you need that support as well, because if you're not looking after yourself, that's going to prevent you looking after those. So self-care is a massive thing as well that, you know, we would advise. We also have a really helpful website of resources where we've got things like distraction techniques, coping mechanisms. We've got suicide safety plans on there, where we work on a model called PAL, which is approved by the World Health Organization. And very recently, we've just launched a parents guide as well. And that's with the aim that it's going to support parents. And this could be used from anybody really, but it's more with the goal of supporting parents of how to cope with helping someone who is having thoughts of suicide, because it is incredibly tough. It's a really tough thing to do. And knowing that you've got that support and you're not on your own with this, because you may feel a range of emotions, sad, helpless yourself, angry, and all those emotions are completely okay. So this is a safe place for you to talk about these things. So I would encourage, as a really fantastic resource, to please phone us at Hopeline UK or contact someone at Papyrus.
Thank you. And I just want to pick up on, there's some very helpful kind of resources and suggestions coming through on the Q&A. I'm sorry that I can't read them all. People are pointing to, you know, using particular approaches, which is about I and you statements, so that you're not putting the young person under pressure, but you're kind of declaring your own experience in it as a partly a way of getting alongside young people, I suppose. Someone is suggesting, would it be a good idea to use the video, for example, in schools, in the PSHE sessions? It may be. I think none of us are specialists in education, and I think a lot of it would depend on what support there was around watching the video. I don't know whether anyone would have a comment on that to make from the panel.
Seems a good idea.
Yeah, Sophie, what would your...
I think it's definitely something worth exploring, again, maybe with somebody, you know, within the education field. But, you know, talking about suicide and raising awareness about it is, you know, and doing that in a safe way is a thing. And I think the messages within that film so powerful. So hopefully that would be used in the school, and it could be done in a safe way with the right support around that film.
Thank you. And someone else has written, have you read Midnight Library, a recent release by Matt Haig, which covers suicide and mental health and is a really positive read? So I think what's interesting is, as we're opening up the discussion, people are coming in with ideas and their experience. And so it shows the vital importance of being able to raise the discussion from the outset. So my last question to the panel is, what key message would the panel want to give to young people who are struggling themselves with feelings of self-loathing, who are self-harming, or who are feeling suicidal? And I'm wondering, Judith, if I can start with you, because you had some very clear messages earlier in the day.
Yeah, I think for me it's to tell people how you really feel, to share with people how you really do actually feel. I mean, listening to Sophie to me has just been wonderful. I wish I'd have known about that resource a few years ago. I understand it's developed a lot over recent years, Sophie, but I wish Liam had known about it, and I guess he didn't. I wish primary healthcare professionals across the land knew about that, and I hope that they will as time goes on, because, you know, if somebody appears in a GP practice, then they need to be able to do something, and that they could even just say to the young person, just ring this number on your phone. There's somebody else to talk to in that environment. Sorry, I know I'm not answering the question, Sue. So yeah, so tell somebody how you really feel. Talk to your loved ones, talk to a skilled therapist, perhaps have a plan or have made a plan in the past. That's something we weren't involved with Liam, but, you know, even if that has aired, and maybe have key words that you can say to others that are significant to show that you're really struggling, because Liam wasn't very good at that with us. He tended to say he'd be okay. And that I think tomorrow will be different. I think something that came across very well in the video, in the animation, is that, you know, it wasn't like that the day before with Liam, and I don't believe it would have been like that the day after if we'd have had chance to keep him safe. So focus on tomorrow will be different. I realise that is hard at that moment in time, and that's why you need organisations and specialist people and people who love you to help you, and do all you can to stay alive, and your life is worth fighting for.
Thank you. Sophie, would you add anything to that?
I think absolutely perfectly and beautifully. I think that it's the key to this is talking and honesty, because I think, you know, we've had a lot of people on the phone say, well, I kind of just said that because I didn't know what else to say, or I can't get the words out when I go to my GP. And I've even suggested people to write it down. You know, it's different ways of communicating that, but whatever way you choose to speak, whether that be writing it down and handing that to your GP, or a loved one writing that in a letter, however it is, please be honest and communicate about how you feel. You're not on your own. You know, suicide, unfortunately, is more common than, you know, some people even like to think. So I would say, please speak to somebody, anybody, whether that be somebody on a helpline, a professional, a friend, or a family member. I really would encourage people to speak. And just why, you know, I've kind of got everybody here, you know, we've spoken a lot about suicide today. And, you know, I know as an advisor that does it every single day, the importance of self-care and looking after myself, you know, when we've had a tough call. So Hopeline UK, as I explained a little bit before, we support people, anyone who's been impacted by suicide. So if anybody that's watching this today, you know, at the end of it has got more questions, or you're struggling to switch off and you want to vent or discuss anything because you've been touched by suicide today, then please call Hopeline UK. We're open till 12 o'clock tonight. I know the information was at the end of the film, but I'll just remind you, it's 0800 068 4141. We've got trained professional advisors on till midnight tonight, every single day of the year. So please feel free to give us a call. We'll have a good chat with you.
Thank you, Sophie. And I want to thank Alan, Alan Saville, who's a participant, who's putting in some very, very good advice. And I'm afraid we're out of time, Alan, so I'm not going to be able to share it all. But his key themes are, don't be afraid to talk about it. And that's for professionals, for families, supporting young people. Don't be afraid to ask the difficult questions about what the young person's intention actually is and what it is that's driving their feelings, and then be prepared to listen. And don't fear that you're going to raise people, you know, the risk by actually addressing the issue. And I think that's a really key message that we're getting here. And that's true for professionals and for just anyone who is connected with in any way a young person who is self-harming or feeling suicidal. So I think the key messages that I'm going to sum up, I have run us over time, so I'll be very brief, are that suicide is preventable. We need to be able to listen. We need to take courage ourselves to, as professionals and supporters, to really listen. And also we would ask young people to be courageous enough just to speak out, just to pick up the phone, or just to say to someone who cares about them, I'm not doing okay. Because there is hope, and the less isolated people are, the more we're able to help and support people to stay well, to stay alive, and to grow and develop into the young people, young adults that they could be. I would really like to thank you all very much indeed. The panelists, the participants, the creators of the animation, and particularly to Judith and your family, because you were the reason that we're here today. So thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, and thank you to you guys as well. So you've all been amazing. I think there needs to be a Family Futures in every region of the UK.
I'll support that. Take good care. Go well, and use your supporters this evening. Thanks very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.